Hello and welcome to the Political Opinions podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. Today's episode will cover different opinions on nationalisation. Nationalisation is the process by which the ownership of major industry or commerce is transferred from the private sector to state ownership. For example, British Gas is currently owned and operated by the private company Centrica. However, if nationalisation occurred, then the ownership would transfer directly to the Westminster government. Nationalisation has a long history of debate within the UK, with the 20th century seeing periods of both heavy nationalisation, such as directly after World War II under Clement Attlee's government, as well as heavy periods of privatisation, the opposite of nationalisation, under Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. As always, there are those who believe nationalisation is good for both the country and the economy, and there are those who believe it is bad. In this episode we will unpick these different opinions and compare them. Of course, the aim of this episode, as always, is not to try and argue for or against one side of this debate, but rather to highlight the different opinions on the topic and provide a comparison between them. With all that being said, I will begin with the arguments in favour of nationalisation, followed by those opposed, with a comparison at the end. When looking at arguments in favour of nationalisation, some people believe that it is better because the government does not have the same motivations as a private firm. A recurring theme seen in this debate is the question of whether profit is a good or bad thing in regards to the nationalised industries, or the industries that people want to nationalise at least. And to some, they believe that having a private firm and having them want to make profit can lead to lower quality products. Private firms may often involve in cost-cutting measures in order to reduce their costs, maintain their revenue, and increase profits. And some people believe that this can lead to a lower quality result, as the cheapest means possible are used to provide the good or service, and as such they are able to maximise their profit at the expense of the consumer. And given that they are natural monopolies, or at least very close to a natural monopoly in many cases, there is no competition, and thus cutting costs and having worse products will not necessarily harm them, because even if the Wi-Fi, for example, you receive isn't as good, if there is no other alternative, you have to make do with it, and therefore to some, nationalisation is necessary to ensure that the quality of the product is not sacrificed in order to boost the profit of the company running the industry. Furthermore, the government can allocate resources better than private firms do. Firms will allocate their resources in response to the market and the demand for the product, but given the nature of these markets, the demand structure is extremely different. It's not so much who can pay, but everyone needs to be able to pay, because even if you can't afford it, you still need water, electricity, heating, and as such, there is a different market mechanism involved in this market. And as such, some believe the government is better at running it because they can allocate it on a need basis, not on a who can pay basis, which is better for these types of industries. Now, some people also believe it is in the public's interest to nationalise these industries. Critical industries such as water, gas, electricity and railways should be run solely for the benefit of the nation's citizens. They are infrastructure, they are not a luxury good, and as such, some believe that nationalisation is necessary because it ensures that there is no ulterior motive associated with the firm, such as profit. This means that this critical infrastructure and industry will not be run in a way that is designed to make profit, but rather to provide the best possible service to the nation, which is what should be happening, to some people at least. Given that nationalised industries are often natural monopolies, which is essentially that the cost to enter the market is so extreme that no other firm can afford to do so, it means that the benefits of privatisation are often lost. People often argue for privatisation because you have profit, which is then reinvested into a company, which allows innovation and over time a better standard of product. However, if there is no competition, there is a much lower incentive to improve. Of course, there may be innovation to cut costs, but the question of will that be passed on to the consumer is a different matter, and if it isn't passed on to the consumer, some argue that it is not necessary and can even be bad. This also links quite nicely into the point that nationalisation ensures that all money made is reinvested back into that industry, which reduces exploitation. In private firms, executives can receive extremely large paychecks, which come directly from the consumers who buy and spend money on the product. This means that taking money away from critical industry due to profit is what is occurring. With no profit motive, however, this wouldn't occur, and all consumers' money will be reinvested in to the industry, and all the money they are spending is going towards bettering that service, and as such some believe that exploitation will be lower. And finally, some argue that nationalisation is necessary because of the lack of competition within these markets. You can't create competition in a market where it's not possible to have more than one firm, and as such the benefits are gone. And as such, some people believe that the only way to ensure a standard quality of product, to ensure good prices for the consumer and limit exploitation, is to have the government running it, because they are accountable to the people, and thus their only concern is providing the best infrastructure possible and not making profit. Moving on now to the arguments opposed to nationalisation. The first of which, and the recurring theme you'll see on this side, is the ineffectiveness of the government at running companies. On the point of inefficiency, some believe that nationalised industries are often very inefficient, as the government and bureaucracy are simply not as effective at management as a private firm. And given there is no competition, there is no need to improve the running. Some argue that cost cutting to boost profit often doesn't come from cutting the quality of a product, but rather from cutting administrative costs and running the service more effectively. This inefficiency over time can even be bad for the consumer, because it can worsen the quality and drive up the price of the product. However, with a private firm and innovation, some argue this wouldn't occur. The rising cost, therefore, of these industries is passed on to the taxpayer. The government has to bear the brunt of the cost for nationalised industries, given that they are the ones running it. This puts increased pressure on the taxpayer, as they are the ones who have to provide the revenue for the government, and this will either lead to there being higher taxes, less money for other essential services, or the most likely outcome, high costs for the consumer to cover the inefficient expenses of a nationalised industry. Privatisation removes any burden from the government, and it is private companies that bear the brunt of the cost, and as such some argue that this is more favourable to the government having to pay for it all. Some also argue that as the government do not operate like a business, they make bad decisions. Governments may operate more in regard to public pressure than the fact that they are actually running what is a business. This could lead to, for example, hiring too many workers in order to reduce unemployment, which is a separate political matter. Now this is bad both for the efficiency and for the cost of the industry. Governments have to focus both on running the industry and on running the country, meaning their focus is distracted and the industry suffers as a result. Some people also believe that the government has often and will, if nationalised, provide a worse service or good. As the government has zero competition and no threat of losing the industry, they can provide as poor a service as possible and not suffer as a result. The election focus, which is what the government cares about, is on things other than, for example, the quality of a train carriage, and if they can cut national debt and reduce taxes at the cost of the quality of what they're providing, they are still going to win elections. Privatised firms need the consumers to use their product in order to survive, and as such, they have more of an incentive to provide a better quality product. And due to the franchise system, meaning that if they do not provide as good a service, the government can take away their franchise and they will not exist anymore. They have to keep up with consumer pressure and provide a better quality service as a result. Now on to the benefit of privatisation in terms of what private firms do. They innovate. Private firms use some, or maybe all, of the profit they make in the short run to invest in the long run, meaning they will cut costs by being more efficient and effective, and they will make more money by having a better quality product, which they could potentially charge more for. This innovation leads to technological and other advances, and in the long run, the consumer benefits from better products and lower prices. The government, however, has no need and no incentive to innovate and improve, and thus nationalised industries often become stagnant and worsen over time. And then finally, on the best solution, people argue that the best solution on this side is to increase competition. Rather than nationalising an inefficient or poorly run private industry, increase competition to force these companies to innovate and improve and provide a better service, or introduce more restrictive franchising, meaning that in natural monopolies they have to operate effectively in order to maintain their franchise. This keeps the benefits of the private sector running these industries without the costs of nationalisation, while also providing an incentive to monopolies with no competition to ensure that the product they provide is as good as possible. Moving on now to the comparison, there are a number of key questions to ask. Firstly, on the question of who provides the best service. While those in favour of nationalisation believe that it is the government who provides the best service. They have no incentive to cut costs or reduce quality in order to make more profit, and can ensure resources are allocated effectively, meaning therefore the quality of what they provide is better. However, those on the other side believe that the government has no need to provide a good quality product or service, they only have to provide the bare necessity, which is the opposite to a private company. Private companies innovate and invest to make more profit over time, however this also has the byproduct of increasing quality for the product or service, and therefore it is better than nationalising it. On the question of who is better economically for this industry, well, those supporting nationalisation believe that the government is better. They keep the price down as they are not motivated for profit, and this is good for the consumer, who is the main stakeholder in all of this, as they pay lower prices and are unlikely to be exploited. Those opposing nationalisation, however, believe that the government is inefficient due to the high levels of bureaucracy, meaning that over time there is no innovation and no investment, and costs will rise, meaning, again, the consumer suffers to these people because they will have to pay more to cover the rising costs of a stagnant service. On the question of who is the best in the long run, well, over time, companies with no competition continue to exploit people through higher prices and lower quality goods in order to make more profit, and thus some believe nationalisation is necessary to avoid the long-run exploitation that occurs with many private industries, and given that these are critical industries, some believe no exploitation should occur at all. However, those supporting privatisation and opposing nationalisation argue that companies can innovate, ensuring that their products get better over time and their prices will fall. Although they are motivated by profit, the byproduct of this is a benefit for the consumer. Governments are stagnant and thus in the long run are less effective at running them. On the question of who is fit to run these industries, well, those supporting nationalisation believe that these important infrastructure and industries should not be operated for profit, and therefore the government should run them, as they have no other incentive other than provide the service which people need. Private companies run these for profit, and to some it just doesn't sit right to have a for-profit firm running something as critical as, for example, water or electricity. Those on the other side, however, believe that the government has political pressures to consider. This means that they will not run the industry as well as a private firm, and although profit may be the motive for which these firms operate, The actual consequence and effect of that is that the consumer benefits, and it's not necessarily the motive for which these firms are operated, but rather the product at the end of it and whether the consumer suffers or benefits. And to these people at least, private firms mean that consumers benefit more. On the question of who pays the cost for the industry, well, those supporting nationalisation believe that consumers are no longer paying for high executive wages and other things often associated with private firms, for example, profit. They are only paying for the cost of what they are using, and to some that is favourable than again paying for profit. However, those on the other side believe that the taxpayer has to bear the brunt of the nationalised industry, and due to inefficiency and higher prices over time, they will have to pay more alongside the cost of actually using the service. This means that the ticket prices for trains will go up, the cost of electricity will go up, and they will also alongside that have to pay more taxes, meaning that in the long run they actually suffer more than if a private firm were operating it. And then finally, on the question of what is the best solution, well, those supporting nationalisation argue that you can't create competition in some markets, and therefore only nationalisation can ensure the industry is helping people most and operating the best way it can. However, those opposing it believe that you can introduce competition in certain markets, for example with broadband there are many providers, or you can introduce franchising, ensuring that firms have to provide a good quality product, otherwise they will cease to operate. Overall then, those who support nationalisation oppose the for-profit motive of critical industry and believe the government can run these better and in a more friendly way to the consumer. Those opposing nationalisation, however, believe that the government is inefficient and support the benefits that occur with private sector firms, for example innovation and improvement over time. It is unlikely we will see much nationalisation in the UK at least following the fall of Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party, who was the main modern advocate. With both major parties now leaning centre or centre-right, privatisation will continue to exist at least for the time being. Ultimately though, what do you think on this topic? Do you believe we should have nationalisation or shouldn't we? Do you believe franchising and competition are good ways to solve the problems of private sector firms running these industries? And do you believe that profit is a necessary motive if the effects, for the consumer at least, are good? And on my point of view, is there anything that I missed, got wrong or could do better? Let me know in the comments or on Twitter, and be sure to check back on Monday for another episode. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all soon. And also, side note, there are relevant links in the description, as always.